Hello and welcome to Staying Ahead of the Curve. I'm Jeff Snyder, Vice President, Senior Consultant with Camac Retirement Group, and we are here live at the Spark National Conference here in Washington, D.C. I'll just hold this up because we don't have some graphics behind us. I'm joined by Matthew O'Hara, a Managing Director from BlackRock. He just gave the keynote address here at the conference. Matt, thanks for joining us at the show.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk defined contribution. That's what Spark is all about. What are some of the salient points that you were able to tell the audience in your speech today?
Yeah, so the point of my speech today was really about how DC is taking over the world, if you will, as an idea. Yeah. And it's really a movement from the defined benefit world into the defined contribution world. So there's a lot of factors that are driving that. I think the primary factor is that defined benefit is great, and it's, I think, in some sense, cradle to grave, and it's taking advantage of mortality pooling, so that's actually beneficial. However, as promised and delivered, it's a bit more expensive, I think, than a lot of governments anticipated. And so, they're all looking for solutions. And DC is seen as one that's fairly consistent and deliverable. And it's the self-saving problem in the sense that as individuals, you have to earn money based on your ability, save from that, invest wisely, and then consume from that in retirement, right? That's your life cycle investment problem. And so where people like BlackRock come in, or others, is we provide professional investment solutions to support that.
So one of the things that Joe Reddy, who is the outgoing president of Spark, said in his remarks was that the expectation is that DC plans will grow to about $28 trillion. So right in line with your thinking. In terms of product set and product things that you're thinking about from an organization, what are some of the concepts that you guys are thinking about? You've got a suite of target date funds. You are thinking about retirement income. Can you share some of what's going on in the back lab, things you're thinking about?
Sure. So just up front, I will say quite freely as a caveat, I'm going to talk a lot about target date funds because that's what I do for my day job.
And that's fine. They're popular asset class.
Yeah,
very popular.
Very popular. And I think that the number is at 80%, I heard roughly, of new dollars going into target date funds.
And that's consistent with what we're seeing with our book of business and our clients as well.
So that's not the installed base, that's new, right? Obviously. But yeah, so what does that mean? So that means that most things need to be designed into or around a target date fund. Because if you have some clever idea that you want to put into a DC plan that's not in a target date, it's just not going to get a lot of adoption. We talk to people inside of BlackRock all the time, direct real estate, alternatives, things like that. They're not bad investments. In fact, they're quite good for a lot of people, especially young people who have a long time horizon and could give up liquidity. But by convention, they haven't really made their way into the 401k world. And if you put them onto a plan standalone, as you and I both know, they're just not going to get a lot of adoption. So the question is, how can you then design target dates to get to the widest range of audiences?
Absolutely. So we're here in the District of Columbia. Actually, we're in Maryland, but we're
right outside
the District of Columbia. So I want to touch on a little bit about public policy. Pension Protection Act really kind of blew the door off of the swell of target date assets. Can you talk a little bit about public policy and things that you all are thinking about as it relates to the PPA or some other tax reform, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. So the big one coming up right now obviously is the fiduciary rule, right? And the question is, how do you treat those in IRAs versus those in 401k plans? And so it certainly makes sense that they should have access to similar products, right? The other thing I would say from a public policy perspective that's important, but probably feels a bit on the back burner right now, is this concept of lifetime income, right? So you mentioned it. Are we working on that? So the answer is we are. And again, if the construct is TDF and everything needs to go through a TDF, how do you make a TDF that has lifetime income? And so the presentation today wasn't about that necessarily, but because Tim mentioned it in his opening remarks, I commented, and I will add here, we see it as a very important design, if you will, or product to make available to the marketplace because, again, that self-saving problem, when you get to the point of retirement, we certainly have guidance for you on how you should try to spend your money, and it's, proportional relative to your then current capital. But what's that number? So right now it works out to be, say, 5-ish%, but that can vary quite a bit over time. If you need certainty of income over your lifetime, you have to look at something like a mortality pooled product, right? So an annuity of some sort, or alternatively GMWBs if you want to go that route. But something that will get you a guaranteed income stream. And we're not recommending it be all of your income because I think that people aren't signed up for that. But the option to go look at it. Now, there are options today. You can go out and buy an annuity. I think that very few people actually exercise that because they don't understand the implications, right? Yeah, you give up liquidity, but in return, you're getting, a lifetime stream of income. And so embedding it in a TDF, I think, would make it a bit more real for investors, and they can understand it a bit better and have the expectation to invest in it. So that's also an important area of research for us. And so also a public policy issue as well.
Yeah, so it's working with legislators, regulators to develop the right policy outcomes for building a better retirement system.
Yeah, so famously Mark Every of Labor, a couple of years ago pushed through some legislation that said, you can be held harmless if you select an annuity inside of a fund. And that's an important point because, PPA is great, but it created this umbrella that's so powerful, people don't really want to stray from it if you think of it that way. However, to provide additional protection and say, look, yeah, we can go out and choose an annuity provider or a few and not immediately get sued, that's a big deal, right? And so I think that has helped to push along the idea as well.
Last question, some of the themes that you're hearing from your clients, you're out there traveling, maybe the globe, but you're traveling the United States. What are some of the key themes you're hearing from some of your clients?
Yeah, so from a global perspective, one interesting one is Japan, right? So I mentioned in the meeting, they are at the very beginning of the switch from DB to DC. They actually tend to be a very highly saved society, if you want to put it that way, meaning savings rates are extremely high. However, they tend to invest in very low return products. So a very high risk aversion. So the idea there is, can you get those investors into, I'd say, a higher returning product that still balances out their risk profile, if you will. And that's a big deal. So a lot of people have been trying to crack that nut. I think that TDFs are likely to become a default in Japan as well, since they've seen the experience of the US. And the question is, can you then translate it into actual investments, right? So that's the global perspective. And then the US, I would say that the larger plans have started to look into doing customization probably a bit more. Now, not all of them need it. Some do, some don't. But they've also looked into things like, if I were to increase my fee budget a bit, what more could I get in terms of product? And so we're starting to answer those questions on a customized basis as well. Because, quite frankly, we're at a point now where fee levels are so low, or if to be blunt, that slight changes there don't really make a big difference in the outcome. But an increase in, say, of fees in 10 basis points with an increase of return, I'll call it of 40 to 50, that could have a big difference. And I think that we've seen this interesting effect of plan sponsors coming out of the relentless fee, bludgeoning, if you will, to say, yeah, maybe we can come up with a better investment outcome.
So I lied that was my last question. I want to kind of going into our next segment, talking about policy, tax reform, healthcare reform. How much of that is framing the conversations you're having with clients? Because you're talking about products, but some of those products are being designed around the current tax structure. Things potentially could change. We don't know. It's day-to-day, minute-to-minute evolving environment. We're going to talk about that in our next segment, but we want to get your thoughts about at least what in the conversation, the context of the conversations you're having with clients.
Yeah, so I would say that when people ask the question, well, if we didn't have tax advantage savings, what would you recommend? And the answer is, I'd still recommend a target date fund, because it actually is the best investment for individuals in the sense that they're all trying to solve the same problem, which is I start out early in my career and I've got a lot of income ahead of me. I need to save from that. I need to invest it. I need to adjust my risk accordingly, and I need to consume from it. That's still a target date fund. So whether it's tax advantaged or not, that's the same answer. You might change the structure of the target date fund a little bit if it were taxable versus non-taxable, and maybe try to optimize the tax performance. But I think that'd be kind of a second order change relative to the fundamental concept of a target date fund. And then look, the other question that came up in the session was about health savings accounts. And so it's interesting, right? Because as of right now, they tend to be fairly simple investments. People are just taking advantage of the tax benefit. But why not come up with a properly risked, returned product there as well that accounts for the type of expenditures you're likely to have in an HSA?
Because we know that we're going to have a huge expenditure in healthcare. I think Empower Retirement estimated it was about $200,000 to $250,000 in today's dollars.
That's right. So it's substantial.
Matt O'Hara, we could go on for hours. I'm not
All day
sure that
long.
we have enough tape, but we thank you very much for sharing your insights with the audience here at Spark and also with our audience here on Asset TV.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
You.